And hello, fabulous AP students. This is Mr. Jacobson. Today we are talking about pre 1200 CE, and we're only looking through the lens or the theme of social. So we're trying to catch you up in AP history, world history here. We're starting at 1200 officially, but before that, we kind of have to give you a small preview of what happened from 8000 BCE to 1200 CE. And I want to look at this through different themes because that's how they look at things in the AP World History. When you take the exam, is they will look at civilizations and time periods through themes. So we have social being the main theme to which we are looking through history. So some people are like, well, what does that mean? Well, let's look here. So if you look over here, this is actually taken from the framework of the AP World History curriculum. So down here it says social interactions and organization, the process by which societies group their members and the norms that govern the interactions between their groups and between individuals, influence political, economic, and cultural institutions and organizations. So that's just a lot of words. Simply put, social covers things like gender inequalities. Um, you got racial and discriminatory practices. You have class systems in a society, and what does that look like, and why is this person on top and that person on bottom? That's what social is. So that's what we're going to focus on. Over here on this side, I put spice tea. Some of you are familiar with spice. Again, these are all the themes or the lenses by which we need to look at history. And so what we'll be talking about is the first S here, the first letter, which is an S, social interactions and organizations. So let us begin. So we're looking at like 10,000 BCE. We have early humans, and they're migrating all over the world, with New Zealand being one of the last places to be inhabited around 1000 or so CE. So these people, these early humans, they were hunters and gatherers, meaning that they were constantly moving, following the animals, hunting them. So the men would hunt out the animals, and the women, the children, they would gather or forage, and they would look for any kind of like berries or plants or anything that's non-animal based or meat. Um, and they would bring it back. Sometimes they find like a dead animal and they bring it back or whatever. But so we have in the hunting and gathering societies, we have men and women working together for the survival of their band or clan or kinship group. And so we call this, because of their relationship together, we say that the early humans who were hunters and gatherers were what we call egalitarian or equal. So women were not looked down upon compared to men. They were somewhat equal, and because they all brought something to the table as far as helping the whole group to eat each day. And although the leaders of these clans were men, which would make it patriarchal, it was still very egalitarian. Okay? So we have little kinship groups of like 20 or 40 people foraging and hunting and traveling the world following the animals because it's a source of food. These consist of small family groups, and this allowed men to hunt, gather. We have nuts, berries, tubers, etc. So egalitarian is how we look at this, the lens of social. We see that the hunters and gatherers were egalitarian. So let's go on. Another common trend we see in pre 1200 through the social lens is slavery. So slavery is happening since the beginning of history. Slavery's going on. It's not new. It wasn't new in the common era. It's been around forever. Okay? And we see elements of history throughout all that, all of which we've studied. So slavery, however, was not always racial. So I want you to understand that slavery originally was worked like this, okay? Two civilizations go to fight each other. One civilization wins, and the POWs, or known as the prisoners of war, POWs, the people who fought against the winners and lost, they get sold into slavery. And so slavery isn't a racial thing. It's more of, well, you lost to us and we don't like you anyway, so we're going to sell you into slavery and make some money off you. Okay? We have, and here, if you look here in the picture, these two men, their skin color isn't different, their facial features, their beard, everything's very similar, yet you could tell this man here has clothes and this one doesn't. This man's not carrying a heavy load and this one is. And so you can see right away that this is obviously the slave. Nevertheless, they do look the same, meaning that they probably come from a similar heritage. Okay, another way you could become a slave is if you took out a loan and incurred a debt and you didn't pay it back by the due date, then that man or institution that you took that loan out to recur their loss on that loan they gave you because you didn't pay it back in the time you said you would, then they could sell you into slavery and they could also sell your whole family. So, stinks to be the family if the husband couldn't pay it back. Another thing we see about slavery, the Romans and the Greek societies, they have like 50% of their civilization is made up of slaves. So we have two civilizations that are stacked full of slavery. And to the point where we even get to see slave revolts. So we have the famous Spartacus slave revolt in the Roman Empire. These were gladiators who fought in the Colosseums and which were slaves, and of course they could get their freedom if they won. But Spartacus was able to somehow unite the people to fight against the Roman Empire, and they did, an okay job. However, they lost in the end because Rome was so awesome back then. They were really organized, they were massive, they had tons of resources. So the Spartacus slave revolt gets crushed eventually, and they crucify all of them and put them along a trading path. I can't remember the name, but anyway, it's pretty gruesome. So other forms of slavery, without calling it slavery, is a form called corvée, right here. And corvée is a form of coerced forced labor that was required in place of taxes. So some rulers would require, for example, people in their empire had to work 2 months of unpaid labor from their subjects each year working on a government project. For example, the Great Wall of China. So the emperor would require people, his subjects, to work there for 2, 3 months, and that would be in form of their tax or something. Another thing would be rents and tributes. As you can see here, landowning elites could charge rent for small and non-slave farmers who worked their land. Emperors and kings would often require tribute from lower-ranking elites in return for imperial protection. China gets really good at making their neighbors pay tribute to them because they said, hey, if you acknowledge our superiority and you pay tribute to us, then we will let you trade with us. And trading in China was like the most desirable thing because so many cool things came out of China, including silk, which they kept a secret for a long time. We even have peasant communities that emerge as well, which we'll talk later on in the school year about. So we have social hierarchies that occur. These are within each civilization or society. These are looking at, okay, what group is on the top, the middle, the bottom. So they've had these for pretty much every civilization that I can think of. There's always some kind of a hierarchy going on. Um, and this is an example. If you look at the at the picture, this is an example of the Egyptian hierarchy with the pharaoh at the top, and then government officials, soldiers, scribes, merchants, craftsmen, and of course at the bottom, which is typical of most hierarchies, is the farmers and the slaves, or the peasants and the slaves. Okay, however, we're going to look at two separate hierarchies or caste systems. The first caste system is called the Hindu caste system. This is in India, and this is part of what makes up the Hindu religion. At the top you have the priest or the Brahmin. At the next you have the Kshatriyas or the warrior ruling class, the Vaishya, who are the farmers, the herders, the merchants, and then the Sutra, who are in essence the slaves. Um, and so you have the priest people, people who are connected to deity, who are at the top. So this is a society that truly values, some spiritual connection to deity, even over the actual rulers and warrior class. So it's interesting to kind of see how each civilization kind of views who should be at the top and bottom. Here's another one. So Confucian system, this is in China. There was a man by the name of Confucius, and he had some ideas that got very, very popular. Okay. Anyway, so he believed that the emperor should be on top. Emperor and government officials or elites, they should be at the top of the caste system. So we have here emperor, the gentry, all this here. He then believed that the peasants should be the second to the top, and then the artisans third, and then the merchants last. And the reason why he wanted merchants to be last is he didn't have any respect for merchants. He looked at these people as people who don't produce anything. The farmers, they're going out and they're digging in the ground and they're making food for China to make it stronger. But the merchants, they're just learning how to buy and sell and make a buck off all the people who are working. So he had much disdain for the merchant class, and China slowly kind of grew into that as well, which we'll see here. So classes versus wealth in China. So classes only divide people into social rank. They did not indicate wealth or power. Okay, just because the peasants were second to the top on the caste system didn't mean that they were any powerful. They were just more revered. It was an honorable profession. But the merchants, going back, even though it wasn't an honorable profession, they were typically more powerful and wealthier than the peasants, obviously. And so it's interesting that this didn't mean that the peasants were more powerful by any stretch of imagination. Whoever has money usually become extremely powerful and a force to be reckoned with. So the merchants, although looked down upon in society, they were still very rich. And some people kind of look at merchants in China as it is here prostitution. Okay, prostitution, you have people, girls, guys who are making lots of money, selling themselves, and although they're probably making a pretty good amount of money, it's a profession that is highly looked down upon, obviously. Okay, same thing for maybe a gambler or working in a casino or something like that. Okay, it doesn't mean just because it's a looked down upon profession doesn't mean that they're not making money and they're not becoming powerful in some way. Okay, and so however the merchants were usually much richer, but the spies, merchants were forbidden to wear silk, ride horses, carry arms, take the civil service exam, or participate in public life. So, although the merchants did have much money and power typically, they were also restricted freedoms in Chinese society. Okay, so we have patriarchy, and patriarchy is an important part, and you need to really remember patriarchy. This is really, really important. Okay, patriarchy is a theme that you always want to remember in world history. It's where male superiority and dominance are found in a society. So patriarchy can be found throughout all of 1200, pre 1200 um, CE. Civilizations are most noted for patriarchy are China, Roman Empire, Greece, but you can also go with India as well. Every civilization I can think of were patriarchal by nature. So, one of the examples of patriarchy are known as the three obediences. Confucius taught in China that all women must be obedient to men in their lives. So, the first obedience or followings for women is to be obedient to their father before marriage. And then for a woman, it was to be obedient to her husband after marriage, and then to be obedient to her son after her husband dies. So those are the three obediences. The belief would eventually lead to a popularity of something known as foot binding. And this is where smaller feet on women were considered very desirable in choosing a wife. And so there was a practice made that women at very young ages would start binding their feet so that their feet were smaller, so that they could get married. And the prettier they were and the more petite their feet were, the more desirable they would be for other people who might be wealthy, who would pay a nice sum, and so on. So you want to get that. Chinese fathers wanted to marry off their daughters because they didn't want to have to keep supporting them. Does that make sense? So to get your daughter out of the house, um, that was good because women would have to care for their husband's parents. So if you're a Chinese mother and father, you want to have sons because in your old age, it's your son that's required in society to care for you. But if you have a daughter goes away and cares for the husband's parents. And there's something called filial piety, which is also found in China. And this is another Confucius idea. Confucianism is really important to understand. So the filial piety is this: the son honors the father honors the elderly for his elderly father, or the grandson's grandfather. And since the emperor is known as like a spiritual father of China, you must also honor him and obey him and not fight against him. So in this picture, we see filial piety. We see the younger son, and he is caring and serving the father, and here is the grandfather, which the father is looking after, taking into the house, and making sure he's comfortable. That's filial piety. And that is something which you will hear over and over and over again because it is a common theme throughout China and thus world history. So go ahead and write your one-page summary, and we'll discuss at the end. Thank you very much. Bye bye.